Hello, everyone, and welcome to PQE Unplugged Fall Travel Planning. We're so excited to see you here today. This conversation is building on the terrific panel discussion that took place last week. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, we're going to be sending that link to you in the chat room. Definitely recommend it. We had 5 amazing experts join us to talk about their fall travel planning. And so the purpose of today's chat is to extend that conversation. This is a special opportunity to just really focus on your fall strategy. And today, our team will be talking through some strategies to help you plan. My name's Mallory. I am PQE's VP of Strategy and Operations. I've been with the team since June, and prior to joining, I worked first in admissions, then in marketing for my alma mater, and I spent the better part of the past decade working for one of the industry's top design firms. And so I'll turn things now over to Marie for introductions.
Thank you, Mallory. As you said, my name is Marie. I've been with Platform Q since November 2019. Prior to that, I spent a decade in admissions from small private liberal arts Catholic schools to a larger state school in international recruitment, domestic undergrad recruitment, and graduate recruitment, and business development and marketing. So I kind of did the tour, but I currently work in the marketing department within Platform Q. So we work with you for your email marketing and text messaging needs. And next up would be Anthony.
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Anthony Pinto. I am Director of Engagement Marketing Strategy here at Platform Q Education. I've been with the company for about 4 months, but I feel like I've been with the company for many more years than that. I was with the University of Tampa for 11 years as Assistant Director of Enrollment Management, and then recently came to Platform Q Education. But the whole time that I was with UT, I did work with Platform Q Education and the Conduit product, so I have many years of experience with the product. And I'm excited. I love working with my clients throughout the country and working with them on strategy and using the product to the best of its abilities.
And I'm Gil. I'm the Executive Vice President here at Platform Q Education. I've been here for about 2 years. Much like our other 3 folks, worked at my alma mater in admissions. That's how I got my start. I think all of us, nobody went to college to get into college admissions, but that's one of those careers that just draws you in, and that's what we've been a part of. I think Marie's the one who's worn the most hats with the different departments and programs, which is pretty interesting. And a funny story before I do the rest of my background about Anthony. So Anthony says he feels like he's been here forever. We continually have that challenge here with our team of thinking Anthony's been here forever, even up to and including when we welcomed new employees recently. We totally didn't include Anthony on the list, even though he was new. So he's been, we really appreciate, all the work that our team does. But Anthony's the one that has been here for 10 years, apparently. Prior to coming to Platform Q, I worked at my alma mater, University of Hartford in Connecticut. Was a Roadrunner admissions counselor there for a while. And then I went to the University of New Haven down the road in Connecticut, was the Associate Director of Admissions there, oversaw our admissions and recruitment staff before going to the ed tech and consulting side. Worked at Chegg for a few years, and then was at NRCCUA for about a year. And now I've been here for 2. So excited to be a part of this conversation today. I think we're going to spend some time on what we feel is a very important topic, and going through the reality that is the fact that, as Mallory said at the top, last week we had an amazing webcast that featured great presenters from a variety of institutions, ranging from super highly national selective research-based institutions, regional private institutions. We're all facing the same challenge, right? Where this is a fall that is like no other, right? We know that traditional outreach programs like visiting high schools, college fairs, coffee shop interviews and meetings, hosting events on our campuses, because of the current pandemic, we have to adjust and we have to adapt. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is, how do we adjust our outreach and our support to best support students while also not burning out our staff, right? And when I think about traditional activities like fall travel, these are things we've been doing for years, right? We know that we would spend 8 to 10 weeks giving the same presentation over and over again at high school to high school to high school and a college fair at night. This comes at a significant cost. How much money are we spending on Panera Bread and Starbucks cards when we're and Hampton Inns when we're traveling, right? And when we think about this from a process perspective, our legacy outreach processes like travel are also not necessarily as efficient as we'd like them to be. The process of collecting inquiry cards and entering those inquiry cards, oftentimes also hard to predict. My first ever high school visit, I don't know about you all, and maybe this is something to share in the chat, is your first high school visit. My first high school visit ever was Norristown High School in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I specifically chose it because at University of Hartford, I worked in my regional territory for those 3 months. I had an apartment in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And so it was like my first day, I want to go to the closest high school. That way I'm not late and I don't screw up, right? And so I walked in the door, nervous as all heck, right? Get to the admissions office, sat there for 30 minutes, didn't talk to one student, didn't talk to one counselor, right? It was, hey, welcome, we'll sit if any students pop by, right? That happens more often than not when we think about the process of high school visits, right? So how can we leverage, and we'll talk really in depth in a little bit about leveraging virtual opportunities to scale our audience, right? And target those students. We can better forecast how these things are going to cost from a budgeting and planning perspective, align this content with our CRM, make it more accessible, available, and immediate so we can actually accelerate those follow-up opportunities. So as we go into the fall, what are we going to do to kind of transition those high school visits to really leverage the relationship with guidance counselors, college fairs to be more informative and supportive versus kind of the, farming people through an experience and, sitting at a virtual booth waiting for people to talk, right? Those one-on-one sessions that happen in person, what are we going to do those virtually? And then, of course, our travel programs and those sorts of things. So I think to start, what I'd love to do is, if I think about, again, my experience at my last higher ed institution prior to coming into the consulting side, I oversaw our recruitment staff. I oversaw the travel coordinator, the people are responsible for going to planning their high school visits and their college fairs, and worked very closely with our VP to establish what those strategies were. And Anthony, I know that up until May of May of this year, you were one of those people that planned your calendar, planned your events, and managed your territory. So if I were your VP and I walked into your office and said, hey, Anthony, we're not doing travel this year because of COVID, right? I need you to set up a virtual meeting with every high school you would have visited. And oh, by the way, you're not going to have travel time. You're not taking naps in your car. We have a really good article about naps in your car, by the way. We'll post that in the chat. But what are you going to do? What would you think if I said, you don't have to visit 4 high schools a day. You can do 12, right? Because you can just set up Zoom presentations with each of these. What would you think? What would you say?
Well, first off, Gil, I started here in April, so I've been actually been here since April. So May, April, whatever, no big deal. But yes, so I stopped planning travel a long time ago. But yeah, basically, I would say to you, that's not an effective use of time. Why would I sit there and give the same presentation over and over and over again on Zoom to students all around the country, or all around my territory? I'm sorry. Instead, I could be focusing on building relationships with counselors and students in my territory, really making those students that are interested in my institution finding a better fit for them, and finding that they're a better fit for the university and that type of thing, and talking about those type of things with them. I'm really helping close them on that university of Tampa, let's say, is good for them. So building relationships would be a better use of my time. So
first and foremost, when you started working here thing, that's fluid, right? You've been here for 10 years. Let's just put it that way. I'm going to push back a little bit on that, right? If I'm your VP, you got all this time in your day now, right? What specific, if it's not the best use of your time, what specifically would you do differently given the opportunity now, knowing what you know about resources that are available, the time that you have to spend on these things? What could you do, whether it's with Conduit or other sources, or resources, I should say, to make the best use of your time?
Number one thing I could think of is content focused on high school counselors. They are the ones that are going to be in front of these students throughout the fall, talking about colleges, things like that. And they're the ones giving recommendations. So build great relationships with those high school counselors and talk with them about how great your university is or institution is, and really help out with getting them to love you so they pass along, recommend your university to their students. Basically doing counselor pages with chat widgets so that counselors can chat with students from around the country. So we have institutions that use the conduit pages and have different sub-pages for their specific counselors to host chats on there to chat with students from their territories. Doing simuliving content is a great opportunity. So you don't have to present the same thing over and over again, like I was saying before, and wasting time. If you simulive that content, you could just have a chat open. You could be doing other work and really building relationships and really answering questions with families and counselors throughout that time while chatting at that same time. So, and then info sessions specifically for your region. Why do that same presentation over and over again throughout the day when you could do one presentation at night to your territory? My territory was New York when I was at the University of Tampa, and I could host my special presentation at night to my New York students. And that could be that focused content. Same content they would get during the day, but better focused at night, ability to answer questions and see that content. So that's how I would go back at you, Gil. So let's see if you got some.
Yeah, and if I can jump in. Oh, Mallory, I see you're saying something.
I have to ask Anthony. So you're telling me that when I was in admissions and I was visiting, 5 schools in the Westchester County of New York every single day, like, you're telling me that I shouldn't just go schedule 5 meetings with all of those high schools to essentially duplicate what I would have done in person. I'm hearing that there's a better strategy than that.
Yeah, why waste your time during the day doing that when you could build relationships during the day with specific students and specific guidance counselors, that type of thing. Spend that time building those relationships and do those presentations. Instead of duplicating presentations, do them all at once to your territory. The great thing about virtual and digital type of stuff is that the ability to scale. So you can do one presentation and broadcast it on Conduit or whatever you want to use to your audience throughout your territory. So that's what I would say to you, Mallory.
Cool.
Yeah, and I would add that I know many of our institutions really focus on the first-time freshman recruitment, but certainly fall has a ton of other things going on. So whether it is your graduate programs, your transfer students, your adult learners that obviously aren't coming straight from high school, whether it's your international recruitment, whether it is your business development, there's so many other pieces to fall travel that Conduit presentations can really help you be able to hit all those things at a time where you could really only focus on your high schools during the fall. And it allows you to have a longer length of time and a more focused time so that you can really give the personal attention. As you were saying, Anthony, you've got that personal attention that you can give people so that you can do focused presentations for your partnership with Best Buy or a major employer in your area, but still be able to have those individual connections with your incoming students and have the chat widgets up for the people that are totally working really hard at work and not looking for ways to get new jobs, right? So you have those chat widgets up for people that are on your website anyway. It makes a ton of sense. For those pieces that aren't just freshmen.
I love the points that you all made there, and I think that generally speaking, again, if I think about if I did speak to a student at a high school visit, which does happen, right? Or if you're a graduate counselor going to a corporate partner or whatever it is, right? Reality is that you're 90% of the time your presentation is exactly the same, and you're answering the same types of questions over and over again, right? High school visit or college or whatever, it's what's your average test score, what's your average GPA, what's the what you have an English program, those sorts of things, right? And so what's really interesting is what we're saying is that it's the content that remains constant and it's the audience that changes, right? And so Anthony, you said presenting at scale, right? You could, if you could clone yourself and visit every high school in one day, you would do that, right? Because you would want to be able to get get those visits in as early as possible, instead of having to extend it through mid-November. You can't clone yourself physically and be at every high school and every day, but you can surely host your high school visit information session to all of your high schools every day. So it's something that's for sure something to think about. And we'll talk in a little bit. We have some examples of schools doing these types of things but I think there's an opportunity here to really adjust how we're going about the high school visit program.
And it's not just the high school visit that's going to need adjusting this fall. It's the other half of why admission counselors are on the road, and that's to go to college fairs. And, countless nights in September and October and early November spent behind that booth, trying to swat the hands just stealing pens. But, in those scenarios, unlike the high school visit, where at least you may have a captive audience you can give a presentation to, at a college fair, they're flying in on all sides, right? And they're shouting like, what's your female-male ratio? And do you have criminology? And, and you're getting the same questions there over and over and over again. And, in the panel that we hosted last week, Jay Murray from Western Connecticut said, and this is his words, now that there are not in-person college fairs happening this fall, every snake oil salesman is coming out of the woodwork with a virtual fair solution. And he pointed out that, virtual college fairs are not new because of this pandemic. We've been doing them for 15 years. And
Gil? Sorry to stop you there, but let's be completely clear, right? All four of us have sat on virtual college fairs specifically run by this company, right? We ran a virtual college fair platform for 15 years. We know the pain of sitting in a booth, sitting and waiting and hoping for students to come to talk to us in our little chat room. And the fact is that approach hasn't worked, which is why, and not for quite some time. There was a novelty to it in the beginning, but now, things have changed. Everything evolves, everything changes. And that's why we've pivoted here, right? It's more about developing that community engagement and the continuous engagement rather than sitting at a virtual booth waiting for someone to come talk to you, right? Because I think that just gets further compounded with the quality of those interactions anyway. Visiting your virtual booth, is that actually an inquiry? I would argue probably not, right? There's additional qualification that has to go into that sort of a process. And the schools that get the traffic are the ones with the brands, right? They're the ones that play football on Saturdays on national television. They're the U.S. News top 10. It's not the Jay Murray's at Western Connecticut is not going to get, and he knows it, or is not going to get that high level of traffic.
Yeah, and back when I did the college fair circuit, it was difficult when I was representing some of the smaller schools. Several of the ones I worked for were in St. Row, and we got passed over quite often from kids that just didn't understand or thought we were all the same school, or sometimes confused me for schools in other states that do have those big football teams. They're like, man, you guys are good at football. I'm like, we don't even have football, but thanks. So yeah, you lose a lot of that personal attention, and you really feel like you are saying the same thing over and over. Yes, our psychology program is great. And they go to the next table, how's your psychology program? And Anthony's like, our psychology program is great. And then they go to the next table, right? And you've got those kids, as Mallory said, the pen stealers. Like, I was very strategic. I put out 2 pens. I didn't want to encourage them walking off. And if one did manage to happen, I slide out my next one. Like, no more than 2 pens.
Just to be clear, there's 2 types of Steelers: Penn Steelers and Pittsburgh Steelers, and we don't like either one of those. So just putting that out there. Sorry, Anthony.
Oh, God. Wow, God. Shots fired.
I digress.
But, yeah, I mean, we know that the leads that come to us through college fairs are not your strongest, right? I mean, hopefully all of you have been evaluating your lead sources through matriculation, right? You've been looking at your data. If you haven't, here's your notice. Make sure that you know where those students that you end up with in the fall come from. And while some of them do end up applying, and you really don't win them over at a college fair, right? You win them over when they interact with your staff, when they meet current students, when they talk with your esteemed faculty, when they find out that your dining hall gives them ice cream for every meal, right? These are the things that they care about. And that's certainly one of the things that sold me when I was looking for undergrad, was the soft serve available in the dining hall. Because 17-year-olds make super rational decisions, right? But no, I digress. Make sure that if you aren't looking very closely at it, you do so. The amount of time that you spend, the amount of budget that you spend sending information to your college fair leads doesn't really resonate at the same level as giving personal attention to those students that raised their hands, whether it was through a form on your website or through a legacy contact or through your connections with guidance counselors. It bulks up the top of the funnel, but is it really the best use of your time? And I think looking at your institution and whether that made sense and whether you can make better sense with the options available to you this year, I think once this is all over, we're all going to take a very hard look about whether we return to the rat race of fall travel.
And I'm going to chime in here. One thing that I used to do, that I did at the University of Tampa, was I hosted an event every year called, I forget the exact name of it. It was basically like admissions tips and tricks. And it was basically like an application workshop, helping students submit those applications. And that's the type of events that institutions should be doing at this point this fall. Take those, you're going to have smaller numbers at the top, but work on converting those smaller numbers. Get those applications in, get them, instead of just being applied, get them to be application complete so that you can hopefully either admit or deny them, whatever you want to do. So application workshops, application tips and tricks, admissions tips and tricks. There's a lot you can do, those type of sessions that really will help out with attacking that smaller numbers at the top of the funnel that we've all known for so many years.
Anthony, let's talk about that for a minute, though, because, you know, I had a conversation last week with a VP at a school in Boston, right? And he flat out told me that the Boston National College Fair, they get 1,800 to 2,000 inquiries every year, like clockwork, right? So if that generates one single enrollment, the entire initiative more than pays for itself, right? So what do we do to offset that volume, right? So, you know, or, you know, put another way, you mentioned boosting application completion rate, right? How do we generate more of those incomplete apps to begin with if we're not getting that lead volume, right? We know that even traditional list sources like NRCCUA or College Board or ACT, they're going to be hampered by volume, you know, at the top of the funnel, whether it's test optional or just COVID shutting down testing centers. You can't do paper-based surveys in the classrooms. Our lists are going to be smaller. How do we get those students, right? What's our process for creating those incomplete applicants to focus on completing anyway?
Gil, you are hitting on something that has bothered me from the day I started my first job in higher education. And it is the reality that at every phase of the enrollment marketing process, we are rewarding volume and vanity metrics. And so we are just continuing to perpetuate this system that requires really high volume at the top of the funnel. You know, that's what the traditional funnel is all about, filling it in with list buys and inquiry cards from college fairs. And at every step, it's quantity. And we, I think, as an industry, just need to get better with focusing on yield, focusing on the quality of the inquiries that we're getting. But that's hard. And and the pandemic is really going to force that shift this fall in a different way. Gil, in the recent, the Chronicle published recently, Recruiting the Class of 2021. It was a research brief. We can send a link to where that's accessible in the chat as well. But you were quoted in there, and, you mentioned that as a counselor, you would come back from the road and, maybe there's a counselor that had this really thick stack of inquiry cards. And it looks very impressive to walk into the office with, your briefcase filled with cards. But What about the conversion on all of that, right? You know, that person who walked in with the bags full of cards was the same person who maybe didn't hit their enrollment target at the end of the day.
Or it takes too long to get those inquiry cards entered because they're still out on the road. And so that inquiry sits for 3 weeks, right? And by that point, they don't even remember you.
Guilty. Oh my gosh, like, guilty. And that goes back to something Gil said at the very beginning. It is the ease of virtual, right? When you can scale what you can do, but it's not just scale, it's the speed at which those inquiries get into your system. No longer is it a week process to get back into the office or mail them back, but it is that instant they filled out the form and click submit. Now they're in your system. Now you can market to them.
Yeah, and I mean, as Mallory said, like the quality of students really has to be our focus. We've seen plenty of publications in the last few years of students increasing the number of schools they apply to and increasing the number of schools they send that email to going, I'm so excited to attend your school. Can I have a free t-shirt? Right? Like we know that that student wasn't coming and hopefully you all delete that email. But you have the ability to find those students that are actually interested in you. And now you've got the time and the staff to show them that love back. You're not waiting until spring events to really develop a connection. You're able to do that now, whether that's with the counselors, whether it's with the students, whether it's with their family. You're not on the road, so you can have those kind of connections early so that you can keep them throughout the process.
And then right back to what I said before, those application workshops, that admissions tips and tricks session that I did, I used to do it in September, and then I would simulive it again. I would do it live, and I would simulive it later on in the fall. I would show up to college fairs, and you would think I was a celebrity. Parents would come up to me like, I saw you online, and they loved it. They would walk up to me and they'd be like, that was incredible. It was so informative. It gave so much information, not only about the University of Tampa, but I was just giving information about the admissions process. So doing events like that are really, really important to really help boost conversion at that part of the funnel. Do those type of events and make better use of your time in the fall.
But again, playing devil's advocate a little bit here, this brings us back to the how, right? How, as enrollment managers, are we going to get any of those inquiries to invite to that information session, to get to be an incomplete applicant, to tell them to complete their application, right? How do we, what do we do?
I'm going to cut you off there. We have to, rethink how this process works, right? You have the ability to spend that money, as you were alluding to earlier, Hampton Inns, which didn't know you were that fancy. We were spending money. We were setting aside budget for things that we can be so much more intentional with, whether I personally think, and hopefully your marketing department at your institution agrees, investing in digital marketing, investing in the ability that you can pinpoint so much, whether you're comfortable being as creepy IT as you want, you can really target the population that is the best fit. You can really align your marketing with the programs that they're interested in. You can really rethink your traditional recruitment methods. And it's so much more cost effective to reach the same number of people. But those are people that align with the parameters that you set. So those are automatically higher quality people than the masses that you might meet out on the road. So your digital marketing strategy is the place that we need to be going, and we need to be very intentional in. At my previous institution, we had a new nursing program come online, which seems to be the thing these days. But when you looked at the way that the marketing department built out our digital marketing we have a new nursing program, for transfer nursing, for the master's in nursing, the really targeted efforts had a very tight funnel. I would argue it wasn't really a funnel. It was more of a straw, a pipeline. The people that we got on were interested and they were ready to go to college, and we just needed to walk them through the steps, and our melt was low because, of course, nursing is a popular program, but certainly we started the funnel with people that were already a good fit, that were already the kind of people we wanted. So then I wasn't wasting my time talking to people that weren't there yet, or that might never be there because they wanted a program we didn't have, or they didn't have a desire to start right now. So you get to be better at your job because you're spending more of your time focused on the right people.
And this goes back to what I said before. This goes back to what I said before, Marie. Building relationships with counselors is incredibly important. When I left University of Tampa to join Platform Q Education back in April, I was telling the guidance counselors and independent counselors in New York that I was leaving. I literally had some counselors, they'll go nameless, they were crying that I was leaving. It was a sad moment. I was there for 11 years, and I had built incredible relationships with these guidance counselors and independent counselors from New York, and they had really helped drive students to the University of Tampa partly because of the relationship that I had built with them. Just chats with them while I was on the road, getting coffee with them, grabbing lunch with them, talks with them on the phone, always being a resource for them. So spending your time in the fall building those relationships with counselors, independent counselors, parents, families, build those relationships. Those counselors are going to be your advocates in many ways.
You know, I keep coming back as we're talking here. We keep talking about the fall, which obviously I know why we're talking about the fall, but so much of this conversation, so much of the admissions traditional, list of activities is assuming that the search process for these prospective students begins in the fall, or, as they are rising seniors. And maybe that was true 20 years ago, but it's definitely not true anymore. And that's largely thanks to digital and how an institution's website is often the front door for the institution. We know that high school freshmen and sophomores are actively thinking about where they are going to enroll and, what they where they want to go, what they want to be. So this process really does not start in September of the senior's, senior year. This all kind of speaks to some of the research that we did when I was working at Stoner prior to PQE. And we have this terrific experience map. This is version 2 of the experience map. And we're going to send a link out in the chat so that you can actually download this. In my time in higher ed, there are few tools that I have run into that I feel are as powerful as an experience map in the admission process. If you're new to the idea of experience mapping, essentially what it does is helps you build empathy for the audience that you're mapping for. And typically experience maps are used to highlight all of the actions, thoughts, and feelings that an individual will go through when they're making a complex decision. And there are few decisions in life that are more complex than where you choose to enroll for college or university. So this map so beautifully details what they are thinking, what they are feeling, the questions that they want answered at each stage of the process, and the actions that they're taking. So if we I know that this is really small on your screen, so I encourage you to download it so you can, print it out and stick it on your wall. But there are key actions that these students are taking while they are trying to understand and explore what their options are that are very different than when they've already received their acceptance letters and, the questions and things that they're thinking and feeling at that stage in the process. So, understanding and exploring that phase has been happening for many of these students for years. It's not starting in September. But what this map can do is help guide you in some of the decision making around, what types of programs are going to be most impactful in this virtual space at different times of the year. And I think virtual really does open up a lot of options for us. Last week on that panel, Courtney Minden from Babson College said, one of the main reasons that she would send her admissions teams to college fairs and stuffy gyms or, those cafeteria lunch visits that I know all of the admission counselors just love, those cafeteria lunch visits. It was because she didn't really have other options. Well, now the options that we had aren't even options anymore. So, hence why we're here today, kind of rethinking everything, right?
Exactly, right. And I think you bring a very good point about, there's the hybrid of, high school visits, things like cafeteria visits, interviews, those sorts of things. So let's shift gears back to those kind of the hybrid of those two and talk about what we call a personal presentation, right? And the reality is that enrollment teams are going to be under a lot of pressure to try to do everything, right? And so high schools are going to want to use their established tools and processes to serve their students, whether it's a rep visits or Naviance or whatever, right? To organize these presentations at 8:30, 11 o'clock, and 1:20, right? Like those are the blocks that we have available for our presentations, and this is ultimately force counselors to go back to do the back to back Zoom presentations that 10, 15 minutes ago, we were talking about we want to avoid, right? So I think that, when we think about that process, we've got to discuss, what are we going to do to differentiate and not just be another Zoom presentation in a series of Zoom presentations.
Gil, it's actually, I'm now thinking about, we had a conversation a couple of months ago when I first
started, right? Yeah.
And we were talking about the differentiation in college search. We all sound the same when you go to college fairs. It's hilarious. Or you do visits or do presentations at high schools. We all sound the same. We all have small class sizes, attentive faculty, beautiful campus, blah, blah, blah.
You can start your own club, right? Just get 5 friends. You can start a
club. One of my schools, it was 8 friends, but 5.
Oh, okay. 8,
well,
okay.
Small schools, you can do a 5.
Fair.
But basically, Zoom presentations all sound the same. It's just going to keep compounding the issue and not really serve our students well if we go that way. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. We want to mix it up. We want different options for these students this fall.
So, to your point, right? I think it's important as a staff to understand that you can say no. I think about, Mallory talked about lunch visits in the cafeteria. Some people do them because they're afraid to say no. That's the only opportunity I'm going to get to connect with students at that school. Even though you don't talk to anybody, you get French fries thrown at you and then you leave, right? And then you have to bring your tablecloth to the dry cleaner because of the grease stains, right? So now it costs you more to do those for no outcomes, right? And so, when we think about things like Zoom presentations through rep visits or whatever it is, those are going to be the lunch visits of 2020, right? These are things that we don't need to do. We're going to choose to do them because we feel the pressure to. But everything Anthony talked about with traveling his territory, Marie, everything you talk about with fairs and visits, et cetera, there are alternatives to this type of an approach, right? I would think.
Yeah, and you got to use the data to back you up, right? Like you have levels in your administration that are like, what do you mean you're not going to this high school? We've all got alumni that are like, no one came to my school out, 5 states away. So having the data available, understanding what it's saying, making sure that you have buy-in up the ladder of, we know what we're doing, right? Your admissions team is run by people that understand admissions. And while it is a new world that we're all trying to figure out, we still know the best practices.
And like I said before, it's all about showing your personality at scale. Zoom meetings work for certain things, but like personal one-on-one type of interviews or financial aid advising or those personal sessions typically that you're doing in the spring when you have the admitted student in your office. Instead, they'll be over Zoom likely at this point, and you're really talking to the families about, okay, is the cost going to work? Is this school a good fit for your child? So use Zoom for that. use your personality at scale over a webcast and using Conduit, those type of things. Save Zoom for those type of interactions, and do large-scale virtual events on platforms like Conduit that I had great success with while I was at UT.
So something we haven't even touched quite yet is the discussion around virtual tours, right? Because not only can our admissions staff physically go to high schools and college fairs, but those students are going to be severely limited in their ability to come to campus and, talk to any admission counselor, right? Or many students. I remember for me, the moment I walked on campus, right? It's that aha moment for a lot of folks. And we invest so much in that on-campus experience, those fall open houses, really tuning up the tour experience on campus, making sure that the best student ambassadors are aligned with the right students to put that best foot forward. We got to take that virtual now too. And I know a lot of institutions are not going to be dipping their toes into the water for the first time with virtual tours in the same way that they will be with some of these virtual events. But, so where's the balance? And I'm curious to hear this group's thoughts on, the importance of the virtual tour in the overall context of fall recruitment.
Mallory, I think if you check the tapes, check my Twitter, check my LinkedIn, I think everybody knows by now my position on this topic. So much so that even the virtual tour providers are now copying this sentiment and sharing it themselves, right? The reality is that your buildings are not your campus. Your community is your campus. So it's prudent to make your facilities and insight into your campus and content available. But the fact is that all virtual tours, I used to say most, but it's all virtual tours are static and don't add a ton of value alone, right? They're a component of an overarching strategy, but they are not your online engagement plan. And I think that's a key component to consider, right? Your virtual tour has been there, right? And it's always been there for the past 5-10 years. It's not the driver of your continuous engagement and your strategy. It's a page in your playbook. That's my position.
Yeah, and with a virtual tour, you're missing so much of what your students and families come to campus for, right? Like when you fill out your campus visit surveys, how many of your students were like, man, I really love that science lecture hall with those 1980s colors that you guys are so gonna renovate soon. Like that's not the feedback you get, right? You get students that loved meeting other students. You get parents that felt the genuine responses from your tour guide. You get the family that was flustered because of construction on the way, and the first person in their welcome center was friendly and helpful, and that's the people are why people come to your campus. Otherwise they would just watch your campus tour on your website and call it a day, right? That's not why they were coming in the first place. When I was an undergrad, I know Gil at the beginning of this said, nobody goes to college to be an admissions counselor. Well, I was one of those weirdos. When I was, I changed my major as an undergrad so that I could pursue a life in enrollment. But when I was a tour guide as an undergrad, I made sure all my friends knew this is my tour schedule for the week. If you see me walking around with people, make sure to say hi. Don't shout at them. I did have a few friends that did that because I thought it was funny. So you really want to have that experience and the student connection. Otherwise, they could drive around on a Saturday and see the outside of buildings. That's not what they're looking for, and that's not what you have to replicate with your online events.
If you're doing things right, from my experience, students are already seeing pictures of your campus on your social media accounts. So if you have good social media, great social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook for the parents. So they're going to see these pictures anyway out there. And they've been seeing them for years, and they're going to see them for many years to come. They come to visit your campus because of that personal connection. If you have a virtual tour, great, but provide access to it as part of your scheduled presentation content. Virtual tour is not going to replace your fall travel by any means. You have to have that personal connection, those type of events to connect counselors with students throughout the country. That's a better plan.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think to kind of sum this up, you hit the nail on the head. I think we all recognize, and I hope the in the chat, we talk about this a little bit more deeply, but the admissions business has always been a people business, right? It's where those connections between people that happens to change over time, right? And so I think that's we need to accept that and consider that we can't just replace the existing strategies that we've had for years and years and years. We have to reimagine them, and I think we have. And part of that is not just plopping up your virtual tour and a bunch of YouTube videos to say, okay, we've got a virtual presence now, but it's how do we facilitate that engagement between students and the counselor and current students and other prospective students together. And that's really what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So, we've been talking about a lot of these ideas in theory, and we've been recommending some ways to evolve, given the current environment and the realities of this coming fall. So, Gil, I'd love to have you actually start to walk us through some really great examples from some of the clients that have been, kind of specifically enacting the recommendations that we've been making for the last, 40 minutes.
Yeah, and I think this is a great time to really be having this conversation, because I want to say that the vast majority of our partners have either completed or are clear or near completion of their fall plans, right? And then you can always iterate and add, right? And that's part of the beauty of a virtual plan, right? Is if we get halfway through the fall cycle, we can cancel content and update and modify based on current behavior and activities. You can't cancel your fall travel in the middle and end your appointments with all the high schools you had through the rest of the fall, right? That would leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But with a virtual plan, you can adapt and evolve, right? And so one of the examples that we have is one of our longer time partners at University of Notre Dame. They have never ever done a virtual preview day or a preview day at all for rising seniors, right? They always, it's Notre Dame. They're reliant on families coming to campus for events and programs and football games and those sorts of things. So but understanding, and Joyce spoke about this last week on the panel, one of the things that they understood is that they need to be in front of these students earlier. They're not waiting for the fall to talk to these seniors. So to your point, Mallory, that process for these students is not something that starts in September. It's something that is currently going on, right? And so they actually integrated their virtual event strategy into their traditional outreach. So they developed a print mailer that they sent out to their prospect list. They had a website with a full agenda. They embedded their Campus Connect chat widget, like the chat widget that's on our platform here, into their website so they could answer questions and be available to students ahead of the event. And they have open chat hours on their site nearly every day anyway. And then they hosted this series of live, pre-recorded, and on-demand content on Conduit throughout their virtual preview days, and saw amazing results, right? So I think when we think about the experience here from a student perspective, we moved it earlier in the process, and we provided now content that can be repurposed and reused throughout the rest of the cycle, which I think is important. Anthony, I know you've been working with Mercer University pretty closely. Do you have some insights into their plans that they've been putting together as well?
Yeah, definitely. Mercer's incredible. They're one of my favorite partners that we work with. When I started working with them in April, we did a really cool event called Make It Mercer for admitted students. Had over 500 attendees come to that event. Then in June, they started doing a prospective student event where they invited students from all over the country to attend. It was called Bears on Deck, a really, really cool event. Then their orientation team hopped on in June and did 6 different orientations throughout the month. Basically did it for different audiences, and then they were able to do their own academic advising on their own after they did the event on the Conduit platform. So that was incredible, and that was a mix of live and semi-live stuff. So it didn't have to waste everybody's time over and over and over again. It was mixed and live and semi-live content. And then graduate and adult undergraduate just hopped in July and started doing events. Both same thing. Theirs was just semi-live content with chat. And that was great because it was pre-recorded, able to use that content, pre-record that content and then play it and then have that chat to go along with it. And it was really, really well received. So love the way that Mercer really planned that calendar over the past few months.
And I would add the U.S. Naval Academy has been doing some exciting things. They've been a partner of ours for a long time, and they really rethought the seasons. They've been doing information sessions throughout the year, so they know that people come in and out of thinking about next steps throughout the year. So they've had information sessions constantly. They've also been focusing a lot in late spring and this summer on counselor sessions. So they've had specific events to meet with independent counselors and high school counselors so that their message is amplified within the student populations. This year, they've also added in some summer STEM events this summer. When that got taken off the table for them, they've moved their really keystone events for recruitment to virtual, and they've been able to have great attendance numbers at those. And they're also doing a bit more of the application stage. Certainly their application process looks a little different than many traditional schools, but they're really diving in for visit days with potential candidates, hosting events and chats and seeing great interaction. They've got this cadence down that people expect the next information session, and we get emails from parents and students asking, hours in advance of the event was, I haven't gotten my link to attend yet. We're still good, right? And they're eager, they're excited, and that kind of outreach is huge. They have seen great attendance across the United States, being able to bring in over 15,000 unique page visitors this year. They are really integrating it into who they are, and their audience has normalized to it. So they're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. They've done a great job integrating their virtual strategy.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. This is a total aside at the moment, but like even Anthony, when you were at Tampa and Naval Academy sees this, Notre Dame sees this. Once you integrate and embed online engagement into your overall plan, your audience gets trained that this is a part of your process and a part of a way for them to connect and engage, right? And so while your first event may not be super gangbusters large for all institutions, right? Candidly, a Notre Dame and a Naval Academy is going to get a different show rate than a Mercer or other institutions, right? But as you add these programs to your, and I know Anthony will talk about this in a couple minutes, but as you add these to your calendar, you're going to start to see return visitors and return opportunities, because now students know, and moving forward, students know there's a virtual option now, right? Because there are, like Mal said before, there are no other options at the moment. So it's what is the virtual option that stands out? And I think a good example of that is University of Connecticut has been doing some really great work. They started in April with UConn Bound Week, which is normally a weekend program that they would run, but it was they ran it over a series of a couple of days, and they saw 5,300 attendees to their program, which is huge, right? You wouldn't be able to support that many students to an on-campus visit opportunity for most institutions, right? And this transitioned into using a new tool we call Conduit Workflow to host virtual orientation. And what Workflow allowed UConn to do is to develop a sequence of videos that students had to complete to be able to complete their orientation as a requirement to register for classes, right? And so by utilizing that tool, they've seen over 7,000 students across their 5 campuses, 90% of them completing it in their first sitting. What's nice about Workflow is you can stop in the middle, come back, it starts you at the same spot you left off. So students don't have to go through it in one sitting, but 90% do, because it's such an easy process for them. And I think, so going from the admitted student type program to that orientation and enrollment type program creates a process where students are now familiar with the experience, familiar with the environment. And I know, Anthony, you've been working with UConn on some programs for the summer and into the fall as well. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. They're onto UConn Summer Series that they started up back in June. has been really, really well received. They do a great job with that program. They've averaged over 1,200, about 1,200 attendees per session, and they've had a great response, tons of questions in their chat. They do a really, really great job with that event. So that event continues throughout the year. I mean, in that Onto UConn Summer Series, they do different events, whether it's the navigating your first year, financial aid, health and wellness, move-in weekends. So different type of events like this that really engage the audience are really, really key. And then we're already talking about like starting to do rising senior outreach. Why wait for the fall? So we're in discussions right now to start planning events for as we finish up the summer and then into the fall. We're building that fall strategy right now. Another client that we work with, University of Missouri Kansas City, does some really cool stuff with their Campus Connect chat widget. They have weekly recorded virtual visits with an accompanying live chat. So that recorded visit presentation is recorded, pre-recorded, then simulive with a chat to go along with it. And then they do daily live chats on their .edu site with admissions counselors chat widgets. So they're really using that Campus Connect as it's an incredible resource to connect with students around the country in that chat format. So the different ways to use Conduit, whether it's chat or live, the Q&A, there's a lot of different ways to use it and take advantage of the different formats. But basically putting it all together, I know for the majority of my partners I've been working with, we've already made a plan or are actually building a plan for the fall. But if you're waiting for the fall, you've waited too long. Got to build your calendar now. That's the most important thing. You can see the different type of events there on the screen that we recommend doing throughout the cycle. And there's more. That's part of the great role that I have at being an engagement marketing strategist, is working with our partners on and suggesting events and coaching them along and helping them out with great events to do throughout the cycle. I know when I was at the University of Tampa, I always loved this. One of the things I started doing a couple of years ago was building my my calendar of virtual events in the summer. So I would build that full calendar, like you mentioned, Gil. I would build it in the summer, and I would plan out my whole fall, every event I was going to do, whole spring, and then summer. And then, like you said, Gil, if you need to change it, you can. It's not a big deal. You just switch it around. But at least having that calendar set up now is really, really, really important, because the fall is going to be crazy. We know that already. So get those fall calendars planned now, and then you won't have to worry about it, and then you could tweak it as necessary as you go along.
Yeah, and I would just add to that before we close the session for today, Anthony, you hit the nail on the head again. When you put together your plan, you set it up for the fall, and you have your calendar in your program, right? When we plan our open houses, we know it's the first Saturday in October, the third weekend in November. We know this a year ahead of time, right? These are things that we slot in, and we know when these are. We put them on the calendar. We promote them on social media. We have it available for students to register, because we know that students are doing their research and adding the opportunities to their calendar, right? So by having these programs planned in advance, it provides you that opportunity to market them effectively and also develop your content effectively. What is something that you can pre-record and play as a live presentation when you have multiple sittings throughout the day, right? Or throughout a week or whatever it is. Those are the types of things that you can think through. So then you're not spending the entire fall scrambling. You're doing what Anthony says he wants to do, right? Be able to do those personal conversations via phone and email and chat with your prospective students. Meaningful replies to emails instead of just processing and churning these things. By leveraging your virtual strategy, you can actually find efficiencies in your day to better support your audience. And I think, again, you said it right. You know, if you're waiting for the fall, you've waited too long. I think if by the end of July or the first week of August, I would say, if you don't have your fall schedule plan locked down, then you're going to be putting yourself in a position like many were in April, when you had no choice but to run around like crazy to move your programs online because everything got closed right away. The one thing we have now that we didn't have in April is the time to actually put these things together and commit to it. But we have to take that time to make that commitment. So that's my final thought anyway.
Well, and on that note, folks, we so appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for tuning in, for sharing your ideas and participating in the chat room. If you don't already have a time set up with your engagement director to discuss and finalize your fall virtual event calendar, I definitely encourage you to set that meeting up within the next week or two. You know, like we've been saying, now is the time to focus on planning and then executing and iterating that fall strategy. And our team is here to support you. So thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again on a future webinar or in our next planning meeting. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.